a second. No, no. Wait. Okay. Wait, there it is. Hello? Okay. So y'all didn't hear any of that. And this is mic 1, right? Yes, it is. Okay. Buenos días a todos. Uh, bienvenido al lunes. Feliz lunes. Esperando por muchas bendiciones por todo el mundo. Thank you for being here. This is the Dishroom on Mondays at 9 a.m. And, in lieu of today's show, these will be recorded, okay? These sessions will be recorded, and I'm going to be trying to translate, I guess, this like live radio space into YouTube, and so we're gonna see how that goes. But the first thing I know is like a little bit more quality, I guess you could say. But anyway, we're returning to a theme from last quarter with Professor Rafael Magaña. He's a anthropologist and social science and Chicano studies teacher in UC Davis. And I interviewed him for the show last year, and we were discussing his book and also like the role of radio in being radical and the power it has to be sort of like this transgressive space, especially during moments, times like these, you know? And so that's what we were discussing last quarter, and I wanted to bring it up back again because of this YouTube thing. Like, I wanted it to be a little bit more controlled and not so, I guess, a little bit more polished, And over here at KCT, fiercely independent. We are fiercely independent. You know, I don't care about, any kind of corporate standard that YouTube might have for me, but we're going to try to be very, very polished today, or we're going to attempt. There's going to be an attempt to be polished today. Let's see. Let's make sure this video is working.
And so it's okay.
Okay. And actually, for the first 6 minutes, I did not realize that I didn't turn my mic on, and so there's a whole lot of like nothing coming from me. I will be voicing over for a little bit, but that's it. This was really fun to do. Actually, he was very kind. He was very open and enthusiastic, and I actually really love that because I'd never met the man before. Like, we had just communicated through emails, and he was just super excited about what I was doing, and I was super excited about what he was doing. I thought that it was the coolest thing ever what he wrote his ethnography about. Oh, and by the way, it was an ethnography. So that means like an anthropologist would spend a prolonged period of time in a specific community, and they're sort of making observations, doing interviews, and they're looking at the inner workings of a society during a particular time. And it's actually, we were talking about this a lot too, that it was the 20th anniversary of the movement itself, and I think about the 5th or 6th anniversary of him writing the book. And he's going to be writing the book he's completing a Spanish version. So find that when it comes out in Spanish. Not sure the exact translation it would be in Spanish or what he would call it, but the book itself was called Cartographies of Youth Resistance, Youth and Punk Movements in Oaxaca. Let's see. We're gonna do make a quick transition. Do 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 do. All right. Okay. Yeah, that's him. This is his website. And we'll just get on with the interview.
Wonderful. Give me.
Wait, I'm covering myself with the camera. Let me put myself right there. I think it'll be weird if I'm double myself. I think that might be a little weird. But you know what? It's okay. Narcissism is can work for you. So in this little section, like I'm just introducing him.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you very much for meeting with me. I can't read my lips. Um. Gosh, what am I saying? Oh, he's a professor of anthropology and Chicana studies at UC Davis. PhD from University of Oregon. Um. Ooh. What else was I introducing him with? Very interested in studying social movements, how people collectively envision like more like liberated futures, and how that actually works. Like it takes so much people to get that together. This is a long intro. I think I did really well with that intro. He's agreeing with me. Look at his face. Welcome to the show.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jonathan, for the invitation.
I'm gonna raise the volume. So, da bit bit bit. Okay, I think I'm asking him to give us like an overview about the whole movement itself. But it looks a lot more expressive than just that. Oh, how do you take punks and teachers and how do you unite them underneath the same single case?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So like we were talking about a little bit earlier before you started recording. We're coming up on the 20-year anniversary, right, of um, this really broad-based popular social movement that took grassroots control of the capital city in the state of Oaxaca, Mexico, um, for nearly 6 months in late 2006, right? And so that movement really began as a labor dispute between the teachers union, which is a very powerful union in Oaxaca. It's part of the dissident wing of the National Teachers Union in Mexico, which is a very powerful union. Um, uh, Nationally.
He says very powerfully, like very nonchalantly, like it was like, and I mean I can see why, but that teachers union was the largest, I think, in Latin America, if not North America too, largest union, labor union. So that's a big detail.
And so it began really as an annual ritual that sort of kept playing out every year where the teachers, uh,
For 30 years, mind you. I think this comes from his what what is it meant PhD mentor too. She was also working in Oaxaca. She decided to focus on the women's participation of the movement. But I believe it was in her book she mentioned for 30 years these people have been out there annually, like negotiating wages and contracts.
um, would attempt to renegotiate a new contract with the state government. The state government would refuse. The teachers would then, on in May of every year, they would march to the central square, the Zócalo in Oaxaca City, and establish an encampment, where they would set up and be, take shifts being there 24 hours a day until the governor would agree to sit down with the teachers union at the negotiation table, and then they would iron out, a new contract for the following year. Uh, but it would always be just enough to get them back in the classroom, but not enough where they wouldn't have to do the same thing again next year. So this was, kind of part of the political, uh, uh, you know, repertoire in Oaxacan politics every year. But in 2006, the governor at the time, Ulises Ruiz Ortiz, had said that he was going to take a hardline stance, that there would be no encampments, there would be no protests. Basically, that he was going to put an end to this kind of political action, and so he took a stance that he refused to negotiate, and instead of waiting them out, he responded with repression. He sent police forces in to violently evict the teachers and their families and their allies who were in the encampment, in the middle of the night in June, of June 14th of 2006. Um, but it backfired, and um, instead of gaining control of the central square, what happened was that thousands of people rushed to downtown Oaxaca when they heard news of what had happened, and they helped the teachers retake the square, the Zócalo, um, and it became this this opening where people who, from all kinds of political backgrounds, and even people who didn't necessarily agree with the teachers, saw this as an opportunity to mobilize against what was an incredibly repressive and unpopular state government, in Oaxaca, who had been cracking down not just on the teachers, but on all kinds of opposition political groups, newspapers, NGOs, you name it, right? And so it ended up becoming much larger than the original um, uh, struggle, right? So it went from a labor dispute between the teachers and the government, the state government, to a broad-based, massive mobilization that actually, the governor and his high-ranking cabinet officials fled the state. Um, the police who had originally been sent to evict the teachers returned to their barracks and refused to continue to attack the growing movement. And so it created a political vacuum. And in that political vacuum, this newly formed popular social movement ended up filling that void and establishing its own institutions for, for governance, really, from everything from decision making to medical care to garbage removal to radio, which we'll talk about later, and all matter of institutions that the state would normally operate. This movement ran. And so the book really takes that, really extraordinary almost 6 months, 5+ months of grassroots control, and then follows a network of young activists and organizers, artists, anarcho-punks, zapatistas, over the next 10 years to see how that experience sort of informed their political, social, cultural projects and imaginations over that next 10 years.
The people that you followed, those anarcho-punks, the zapatistas, and they had been alongside with the teachers because the teachers had been there every year, and so those people too, they had been layering upon years of resistance, and also because it wasn't just a boom one-time event. I believe you mentioned earlier they had been just like the experience with the police had really let them relate to what the teachers were doing, and that created a lot of strength in their community.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's a great point. So, really, what defined the participation and politicization of a lot of these groups, right, that I write about in the book, they don't have like a single ideology or political dogma that they follow. It's a diverse network. But what a lot of them, especially those that were part of the anarcho-punk movement and the street artists that came from uh, sort of a graffitero background. What they often had in common was that they already, before 2006, before this movement sort of emerges, is that they had a very antagonistic, hostile relationship with the state vis-a-vis the police, right? Because they had been the subjects of police brutality and harassment and profiling because of their cultural practices, right? Whether it was the way that they dressed, the kind of music that they listened to, that they performed, whether it was their writing in the streets, right, with their graffiti or their other, other forms of visual street art. And so they already had uh, that that relationship with the state that when the the sort of that opening happens, right, where all of these people flood into the center of the city and into the streets, they were among the first to pounce, right? They were ready. They were waiting, right, for this moment, right, to really to push back against the repressive um, actions, right, of
I think it's very interesting too that he kind of describes the way that it started as the punks being ready to pounce, because I think as we're getting to the point that, or we're trying to say that it's like it was there's so much context behind it, and there's so much um lead up and history towards what was going on. I mean, I don't think we talked about this either, but there was a huge protest where the Ortiz administration was trying to remove this tree from the Zocalo. That was that it was described as an ancient tree, and that's where the first barricades came from people barricading the Ortiz administration from coming and taking out that tree, because they were making it a little bit more touristy. They were doing more neoliberal, right? They were enacting more neoliberal policies, and that included the removal of the tree and the removal of protesters. And so that's what we're trying to get at here, where it's this long-standing, really violent relationship with the government that all of a sudden, boom, here's your chance. Ortiz takes a hard stance, and you get that oscillation. Oh, us too. And so they were ready for that. This was a practice. This was a community value that was being put to the test, and in a very, very, very direct and confrontational way. Because before that, kind of just brush it aside. But this was entirely different, and I think I think that's interesting that they were ready to pounce on this moment, and they were ready to take advantage of it.
Of the state and local governments, right? And so, more than an ideological alignment with the teachers, it was more this what they agreed on was that authoritarianism and this police this hard line response of sending the police and the military to resolve political disputes through force was unacceptable, right? So that was what they shared, right? And that was what prompted many of them to join this emerging movement.
And one thing that I found especially very, very special about this movement was that it was like teachers and punks were able to come together, and they were able to unify and essentially create like a city governed by themselves, like governed by grassroots movement for 6 months on all those levels that you had mentioned, like even like covering healthcare. And so for me, reading the book, it gave me a lot of questions about the role of the government, because the for one, the teachers having to go back every year, it seemed to me that corruption was not more so just like a one-on-one basis, like bad apple, like Maurice just shouldn't have been elected. Like corruption was being used as a tool. And so it gave me a lot of questions about the relationship between policy and people, and who should really be making and enforcing those kinds of change, because the police is that's another like tool of corruption, and policy became too. And so the people coming together, like there has to be, well, I'm sure you've heard solo el pueblo salva al pueblo. Like, is there, what do you think was the role of the government and beyond this movement? Because like obviously they were not inept, and they were not willing to be able to provide the support that these communities needed. And the communities in turn were 100% capable of doing it themselves.
Watching it back,
Yeah,
I
that's a great.
am such. I don't know if I was tired or something. Like, this is very. I feel embarrassed, but we're gonna continue.
Great, I think that's a really important question, in a much broader in a much broader sense, right? What is the role of government? What is the role of the state, right? And depending on your reading of history and your reading of the current moment, I think we could come up with very different responses. But I think my my understanding of things is especially in moments like we're living today, I think makes it pretty clear, right, that the state is not there to provide for the people, right? It is there to enforce a highly unequal economic and social system, and is there to protect the interests of those in power, those that benefit from this highly uh, unequal hierarchical system, right? And so I think in moments like Oaxaca in 2006, it really, the danger to the state was that the people were showing how unnecessary the state is for social cohesion, right? They didn't need the state. In fact, what they needed was the state to stop intervening, right? What they needed was to be allowed to come together and figure out other ways of of uh, of governing, other ways of relating, other ways of um, making life day to day. Um, and obviously it was the way I talk about it in the book is really as this really amazing radical experiment, because that's what it was. Like, there was no prescription or recipe to follow. It was like, okay, it wasn't something that was expected. Like, nobody expected the state to just essentially vanish and create this void, right? Really, the presence that the state had over most of that time period was through paramilitary um, convoys that they would send in to assassinate people and to destroy movement infrastructure. But the state wasn't there to provide, right? And that was very clear, right? So yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question, but to me, how I understand the role of the state, it is definitely not in the U.S. or in Mexico. I don't think either in either case is the state there primarily to provide for the majority of people, right? It is actually the opposite, right?
And I mean, even within the movement itself, there's this one quote from Rosalia, and she says, we need change that starts from the soil, from that which keeps us alive. And so it, although it was this sort of like spontaneous, all of a sudden thing that nobody really knew it was going to happen, it started that health of the community, and it started that strength, that community, and like the security the community needs to be able to think about these things. And so even though it was very like spontaneous, these people were calculated and they knew what it meant as it started. And I think the coherency of the people and the consciousness of the people, it needed to be it needed to be not curated, but cared for in their own spaces. And I think that's what really spoke to me about what the radio was able to do. Um,
And I did not bring this up, but there's a comparison there from 2006 Oaxaca in punk and youth and radio spaces where people can take care of their worldviews and they can be informed and broadcasted like to literally anything. And there's a huge difference. There is a astonishing gap between the way that we are taking care of ourselves and our worldviews now. Our worldviews come from Instagram Reels. Our worldviews come from whatever assignments our professors might give us, and even then, we are a very small percentage of people who get to have assignments from university professors, who get to be well read and get to experience the world this way. Um, and so the larger, I don't know if consciousness is a good word, but the larger space and health of taking care of your worldview in a space that sees you, because here, I was talking about this with one of my professors and one of my coworkers. Here, the buildings, they consume you, but at the second that me and my coworker went down to Barrio Logan and we went to the North Gate there, oh, it was like it was more residential. It wasn't as corporate, but there it's like the buildings, like they saw you. That's crazy talk. So we're just gonna keep talking.
Would you like to give us a little bit of like a run through of what happened with the radio?
Yeah, I think that was a really great way to put it, in terms of the the political and social projects that took root in 2006, and then over the next 10 years of what I track in the book, about how those projects sort of grew and transformed and mutated and everything, is that you know while the emergence of the movement was spontaneous in the sense that nobody planned it, in the sense of like, on this day this is going to happen and this is how we're going to respond. It also didn't come out of nowhere, right? It came, I think, from a very organized, civil society uh, that had a very clear analysis and assessment that the state was not going to solve their problems. The state never solved their problems, and was not going to. That's it's one of the things that I think in the United States, I think a lot of people are coming to understand more and more. Obviously, there's populations in this country that have always known, in the United States, Black, Indigenous, working class, communities, chief among them, right? That the state, is not here to protect us, is not here to solve our problems. But I think a lot of people, historically have sort of drank the Kool-Aid, right? In terms of thinking that you can appeal to the state and the state will solve your problems. In in much of the world, that's not the case, right? Especially, um, when you're thinking about a place like Oaxaca, that is among the most um, um, marginalized states within Mexico. You had all kinds of projects that existed that were already doing a lot of this really important organizing work, even if they didn't call it that, right? But just meeting the needs of the people, so that when this sort of eruption happens in June of 2006, it wasn't starting from scratch, right? There was already, the groundwork was there, connections already, um, already existed. New connections were made, new relationships were forged, but there was something to build on, right? And so the radio was one of the spaces and the institutions where the movement really was able um, to kind of fill the void that was there at the time, not just from the state and the government, but also just from um, the corporate media. The way that they were covering the movement was really it was really one-sided, and it was really pushing the government narrative, right? That that the movement was infiltrated. I mean, this is like a textbook um, sort of way um, that states try and discredit popular movements, right? Is by suggesting that popular movements are actually, infiltrated by outside forces. They're not actually about what they say they're about, right? Because they can't, the state can't discredit a lot of times the righteous um, outrage of the people, and so they try and basically say, well, they're being lied to, or they're lying to you. They're not actually about what they say they're about, right? And so the radio was one of the mechanisms, right, that the state was using to try and discredit the movement. And there was a moment when women from the movement um, had launched a massive march, right, where they were marching as women of the movement, and they decided, that they had had enough of this propaganda that the local radio stations had been disseminating about the movement. And so they went to a public TV and radio station headquarters and asked for, some airtime to be able to give their perspective about what the movement was about, right? To offer a counter narrative to that the state was disseminating, and they were refused, right? They were refused the airtime, and so they decided then and there that since this was a public station, and the public was not being given a voice, that they were going to take over the radio station and the TV station, and so they took it over. They took over the main TV and radio station, and eventually took over more radio stations, and they figured it out as they went along. How do you run a radio station? How do you run a TV station? Um, these caravans of paramilitaries that I mentioned earlier would regularly attack the antennas of the stations, and even um, the equipment, the radio equipment, and so they would take them off the air, and then they would go take over another one, right? And so it became this moment in the life of that social movement where they they held their own programming, and they opened it up to different groups, including the a subsection of the anarcho-punk movement, had their own radio show on one of these movement radio stations every week, and they would play their music. They would talk about what their movement was about. They would talk about the issues that were important to them, which were anti-discrimination, anti-racism, especially thinking about anti-indigenous racism, that's prevalent in Mexico as a settler colonial society. That is one of the main ways that white supremacy manifests in Latin America, right? Is anti-indigenous racism. So speaking about that, speaking about animal rights, speaking about feminism and feminicides in Mexico that have been occurring for decades, um, etc. Right? So they took up space on the radio as an anarcho-punk movement, and I talk about in the book some of the really powerful um, moments and connections that they had with listeners who would listen to their show and who were, of different generations than they were and were really moved by learning more about these youth that they had really negative prejudices about, and really being like, wow, I had no idea, like like what what your movement was about. We had no idea why you dressed how you dressed. We had no idea what the lyrics were of the music until you explained it. And so really beautiful, profound connections that they made with fellow Oaxaqueños who they otherwise would have probably never.
Another detail, the radio was airing in about 6 different indigenous languages, Like, and that scope, that that reach, that it's honest, it's astonishing. Because those languages most likely have never been heard on the radio. Those the speakers of those languages never heard themselves in the radio. And so I think that that speaks to the power of a creative space, or at least something like the radio, where you're able to take and come as you are, But we're going a little bit over time. As soon as the other DJ gets in here, if they're coming, because the DJ shows were optional today. Once the second DJ comes in, I'm ending the show. But I'm gonna steal some time because we're obviously not done.
Been able to connect with, and they maintained a lot of those connections, which is also something I talk about, like towards the end of the book. Some of the lasting relationships that were forged within the movement, and the radio was also one of the spaces where those kinds of relationships were made.
It was striking to me to hear how the women just decided, let's take this over, and I like just give that a minute. Like they were able to just come in and take it over, and I had to think, like, what if like a frat house came to the radio station and just took it over and it became the frat radio? Like these spaces, it in relation to whoever is occupying them, it was just like such a I don't know how to explain how I felt reading that, and then also how it was able to be a space so that people were able to come in, they were able to tune in, they were able to learn, they were able to gain skills that they could take forward in other like places in their lives. And I the radio as like a space to almost conduct that kind of social movement energy and to represent yourselves, the women. I believe that you had written that they were not being heard out accurately or enough in the teachers union. And so the radio was able to give them that voice. And then the punks were able to go out and relate to fellow Oaxaqueños on the radio. And so even though it really is just a group of people occupying a space, and that's like it validates and legitimizes those voices so much. And I just like I can't, it's almost magical, that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's really one of the things about radio that has made it really a really significant um, uh, space, right, for social movements in the global South, especially for generations, right, is that it has the ability, right, to disseminate those voices and those stories, those perspectives um, in a way that really can be a democratizing force, right? Where the usual gatekeepers, right, of what gets said and how it gets said can be subverted. And when you have a movement take over those spaces and really cut out the government censorship that happens, it can be really powerful. And it's like the space of the radio station itself, right? But then there's like the sort of like sonic space, right? Of like how that gets then spread out throughout the state, and then even some of them being transmitted online, then it becomes an international, global, also extension, right, of those political actors and imaginations that that are far from the mainstream being heard, right? And so absolutely, it could be a very transformative thing, right?
And yeah, transformative, and like being able to give so much power to, I there's a you included some pictures, and this also like I'm going through the book and I'm just like getting hit in the head with so many of these like realizations. And it kind of checked my own ignorance too, because there's a sticker patch from a silk screening event that reads Apoyemos la causa Palestina. And so in 2006, like somebody's able to sort of ascribe themselves to this punk movement, and it broadcasts so many different ideas and struggles, and it gives you a place and the mindset to be able to like think about these things and to connect yourselves with that kind of with those kinds of causes.
And so that would be my question for KSDT, and then also just in general. I'm whoever's watching. What are the creative spaces that you are in? What are the social spaces that you are in? What is being broadcasted to you, if and you being a part, and like being a part of those spaces, you are part of that broadcast. What are you bringing? What kind of perspective are you shaping through this community that is being broadcasted to others and is being strengthened by others? Because there's so much power in that. There's so much power in that. We're gonna continue. I'm gonna stop talking so much.
And even so, like even taking that and thinking about like the punks and what their space is and what they're able to like connect their own audiences with, and then you give it to the radio, and then that furthers their influence. Like I wanted to know because I believe you were there, in 2006, right? You were a
I got
graduate
there in
student?
I got there in 2007, actually.
2007. Okay.
Mhm.
And by then, like things are still happening 2007. I
Mhm.
wanted to know specifically the things that you took away from the punks and like their attitudes, their beliefs. What were some of the moments and people that sort of just really spoke to you on a deeper level and like really influenced your way of thinking?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's actually something that I've been thinking about recently for a couple of reasons, right? One, I'm right now I'm working with a couple of comrades that are helping me translate the book into Spanish to get it published and available in Mexico for the 20th year anniversary, right? And so I've been, kind of revisiting the book in that context, but then also right now thinking about my current research and current things that I'm writing about and thinking about, which are heavily influenced, right, by the punk movement and the broader sort of network of um, organizers and activists, right, that I worked with for this book. And what they all have in common is really this um, just this refusal to be governed, right? That I think right now in the moment that we're experiencing in the US, but also globally, right, where we have fascist governments really exerting more and more control over our lives. I think this refusal to be governed is such a gift, right? And it's something that's worth um, nurturing. I think to go back to what you were invoking Rosalia, right, earlier, and it's something that I think a lot of people have a really hard time um, uh, they have a really hard time wrapping sort of their head around this idea that there is nothing sacred about the government, right? There is nothing sacred about the so-called rule of law, right? Those in power have never followed the rule of law, right? They've always made up the law as they go along and apply it as it suits them, right? And so this refusal to even play that game and to say, you know what, there are things that are more righteous and more worthy of defending than the law and than obedience to a government, right?
And if there's anything at all to take from this, that is the most important um, message, I believe. There's nothing sacred about the law. The people in power have never followed the law themselves. And there's nothing sacred about tyranny, that tyrannical belief to be in power. And then even in a democratic setting in Oaxaca, that too can be used as a tool against the people. And well, state interest can be used against the people. There's nothing sacred about that. And so yes, there is there are things more righteous than upholding the law. And yeah, that can get dicey too, but we're gonna continue. I'm so sorry if I'm doing like an illegal thing, stealing DJ time or whatever.
And so that's something that I take away, right, from these, um, you know, young people at the time are no longer young people, right? But that spirit I know lives on, and that new generations continue to come up and embrace. Um, so yeah, I think being ungovernable, right? Being ungovernable, I think, is a worthy uh, goal, right?
Right. And I would like to look at being ungovernable as a sort of responsibility
Mm.
sometimes, but
Yeah, in times like this, I think
and
you're
right.
absolutely correct. Yeah.
And so taking that responsibility, um, because there's contemporary problems, but then also radio has changed. People don't have radios. And so also making the radio a contemporary player for that responsibility. What are your thoughts on that too?
Yeah, I mean, I think I came to Davis last year, right? And when I was getting ready to make the move, and I was doing my research about the university, about the surrounding communities, and things like that. One of the things that I was really excited about, was this tradition and this history, right, of independent student run radio, right? Because historically, that has played a really important role. I kind of focused on the global south earlier, but in the United States, right? In social movements, in countercultural, counter hegemonic movements, student-run radio has been really important, and obviously it's something that's less and less prevalent with the sort of corporate takeover of radio and the foreclosing of really uh, independent media across the board, right? And so while you have, on the one hand, sort of, it's much easier now to have podcasts and to have, like a YouTube show, or to get yourself out there in certain ways. Um, there's also so much of a saturation that finding the audience is tricky, but having a radio station that people can dial into, right? And to have it be kind of unplugged from the matrix, right? I think is such a powerful,
Right.
beautiful thing that I think is also, like you said, is worth fighting for, but also is a responsibility to continue to fight for it, right? Because it didn't. I don't know the history, but I can tell you, I know that it didn't come easy, right? That it hasn't been given, right? And so to continue to fight for it, I think is really important.
And just the kinds of people that radio collects, because like as you said, you have to dial in. So the people who are doing that, the people who are taking the extra step, I feel radio has like a responsibility to be ungovernable,
Mhm.
but as well to really harness that power that they have to organize people as seen in Oaxaca. Because already these people are coming in to the radio of all places, and especially now.
Organize and provide community for the ungovernable. Let's clarify that.
And so I think a part of radio's contemporary responsibility would be to just really hone in on that organizational aspect that it innately has in being radio.
Yeah, I mean, I think the organizing potential is really big, and the fact that the people who are dialing in, right, are many of them are probably already also organizing in other spaces and in other capacities, and so the radio has the ability to be like a force multiplier, right? Like where it brings together existing projects and existing networks and you know and things like that. And so yeah, I think that's what's so exciting about it.
The accessibility of it, and the punks were able to come in with their indigenous like reclaiming indigenous roots, and they were able to channel it through the radio. Um, and I would love to get into liminality because you brought that up, and I was like, holy moly, like I actually have to email this guy. And um, would you like to talk a little bit about how liminality and communitas kind of play into that social organization, and like not like a not to like ask for a guideline or like a how-to book, but like how important was it for these people to like how did you see it play out in Oaxaca?
Yeah, so you know what you're getting at there is you know one of the ways that I found to talk about what I was hearing from people, right, when they were telling me about their experience in 2006 and you know how that influenced and impacted them, you know, as they moved forward with their social, political, cultural projects. Um, you know, what became, you know, what kind of stood out was that um, 2006 and the kinds of movement spaces that were created, whether it was the radio or whether it was the barricades or the Ocupa, right, which was this social center that punks and other young people created right in a abandoned police barracks in downtown Oaxaca. Um, that these became you know these liminal spaces, right, where sort of the existing and the whole like idea of liminality and everything that I'm drawing uh, from in the book is you know from the work of this like really famous anthropologist Victor Turner, right? He was talking about sort of like liminality that happens in different like rites of passage and rituals and things like that. But in the context of social movements, you can think about it in terms of these these moments and places and spaces in time where the sort of the existing social hierarchy and structure kind of get turned on their head, right? And the sort of existing rules of social engagement really don't apply in the same way. And so when it comes to the, you know, the radio and the punks and the conversations that we've been having up to this point, you can think about the ways that other members of Oaxacan society who had these prejudices and these preconceived notions about who the punks were, right? Which were largely, you know, that they were just these um, troublemakers, criminal, um, you know, disrespectful, nihilistic, like just thinking that they had nothing to offer, right? That they just were contrary to everything that society deems respectable, right? Um, and so you had people getting to see the punks in a completely different context and in a different light, um, and actually being able to connect with them, right? And being like, oh, wow, you're actually not what we thought you were. Um, you're complex, nuanced human beings just like all of us are, and you're actually doing a lot of things that we agree with, right? And you actually hold values that in some important ways are consistent with those that I have, right? And so, um, and one thing we haven't talked about, right, is a really important thing that happens in the context of the social movement that I think opens the door for this kind of um, um, reorganization, right? This sort of social reorganization is that the punks served a really important function early on in the movement as part of the popular security force, right? Um, that they participated together with members of the teachers union and other folks, right? That they would form the front lines um, against police when they attacked, which happened early and then again later in the movement. And then in that intermediate period where the police were essentially weren't present, it was with the paramilitary convoys, right? And so they would be the ones that were providing security, right? And they many of them volunteered to do that because again they already had this experience of being on the receiving end of police brutality, and so this was opportunity to fight back, right, and to protect um, other members of of the movement from receiving the same kinds of violence that they had been on the receiving end of for a long time. And so that they earned the respect of a lot of people in the movement through that, right? And so then this kind of opens up the door for this for this restructuring, right, of the role of the punks in that sort of milieu, right? Um, and so, in some instances, when the movement is over, some of that reverts back to how it was before. And in other cases, the relationships that were forged in 2006 continue to this day, right? And so, it is a little bit uneven in terms of the durability of it, but definitely in the context of the movement, it was something that the punks that I spoke with really, something that really that they took away from the experience that was really fulfilling for them was that sort of chance um, to forge new relationships with folks in their communities that otherwise were unlikely, right, to happen.
What an interesting subversion to go from punks to a security force and to be able to gain that respect and to be able to participate in your current community and give back in such an influential way. I think that really, I just cannot imagine what it might have felt like being there. And
Mhm.
when you mention liminality and communitas, I personally I can't imagine exactly how that also would feel like, but that was like a perfect way to sort of describe.
Um, for a lot more context for my non-anthropology majors, which I'm so sorry you guys don't have to major in anthropology, or I'm so sorry you guys aren't majoring in anthropology, but liminality and communitas, I think mm, Professor Aftab Jasal, he explained it as you're like in a sports crowd, it's your favorite team, and like it's just like a sea of people that, and you guys are cheering at the same time. Someone just got a goal, like, and you can be as loud as you want. The next person over, like, you're screaming in this stranger's face, like maybe you take off your shirt, maybe you drink a beer through your shoe, like that's how I was explained to the feeling of liminality in community.
What it might feel like to be part of something like that and to have that intrinsic motivation and subversion of your role in society.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should clarify too for folks, who haven't read the book and are hearing our conversation, that when we say security force, right, we're not talking about police, right? So it wasn't that they were a police force, it was more of a self-defense force, right? To be clear, right? So they're not they're not
Right?
policing
Yeah.
people in the
People, yeah,
movement
they
or
were just at the barricades, like,
yeah, it was self-defense, self-defense.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm so sad we're running out of time. I would like to talk to you a little bit after if you're still okay, free, but this is about as much time as the radio is going to give us. So, thank you so much for tuning in. This was Profe Magaña. Would you like to give some closing words?
Yeah, no, thank you again for the opportunity to talk about the movement, about the book. I think, this coming up 20-year anniversary is a really great opportunity to kind of look back on the really amazing example and lessons that these organizers and activists and just regular people who participated in this extraordinary movement have left us with. And the radio, independent student run radio, I can't think of a better place to have the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Uh, I'm going to end the recording. And
Oh my gosh, like getting back to this and getting back to this whole interview, like, okay, hold on, let's do a little transition. So, da da do do do, KSTT radio, it's the Dishroom. Da, 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 da. Okay, getting back to this interview, absolutely crazy. Like, I'm just so grateful for Magaña because he was so, well, one, like, this was his whole dissertation kind of thing, and I'm gonna move it over here because I'm being blown out by the sun. Maybe blown out wasn't the right word, but like being so patient with me. I thought I was doing a good job. That was not a great interview, and I think part of that was just I was just trying to like get across the whole story from the expert, the expert in the field. But the conversation we had afterwards was a lot more helpful actually. But I was just looking for that, overview. And yeah, going back, like, definitely I would have made more of a conversation out of it instead of it being, like, hitting the different points of it. But, super grateful that he wanted to come on. And I don't know. I'm not sure who else is going to be pulling up today. The DJ never came, but yeah, I pretty much got all my comments in throughout the recording. Now I have to download this recording onto a USB drive, and God knows how long that'll take. I'm gonna leave some music playing though because I think that's really cool. And last quarter I was very, 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 very intentional with the music that I was putting on, and I made sure that I was always talking about the music and that it had something to do with that shows temas, but we're gonna have to be flexible today. We're just gonna play some music. Probably just like what I've been listening to recently, TBH. And we'll just let that play out until the next guy gets here. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. And for YouTube, I don't think I'm going to be recording anything else aside from this. So it's just going to be like cut and dry. Here you go, YouTube. You get a live Twitch stream radio. Yeah, that's it. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. This was the Dishroom. Tune in next week, guys. I'm pretty sure there's going to be something cool for that too. I might be talking with an archaeologist, material culture, and all that good stuff. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. Have a wonderful week, guys. Have a wonderful week. Let's see. Let's start with
Night seems to fall